Hello, and welcome to the newest installment of Avenicast. And joining me today is someone I never, ever, ever get to speak with. I'm just kidding.
Never.
I talk to him all the time. Is Avenica's very own VP of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Teron Buford.
Hey, everybody, how y'all doing? Oh, can't respond to that, but the sentiment's there.
It's all right. You know, you meant well. I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. It's all good. So Teron, like always when we do these, the first thing we want to hear from you about is your first job. So tell us about your first job experience, what that means to you, what you learned from it, how'd you get it, all that stuff.
Yeah, so we coming up in Chicago, my mom was very, very aware of some of the potential dangers that might have lurked, outside for me. So she made it her mission that if I could focus on academics, she would try to take care of the rest of the stuff. And we were not rich by any means. In fact, we were very, 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 poor on the other side of it. But somehow she was always able to make ends meet. And so I focused a ton on my academics. So my first actual, W-2 tax return sort of job didn't come until I was actually a freshman in college. I was a line cook at our on-campus restaurant. Before that, I started off in the kitchen, right? I feel like I'm going to tell you one of those stories where I started in the kitchen and now I'm the executive chef at 14 Michelin star restaurants. It's not that. But I started off in the kitchen and kind of worked my way up and ended up being a line chef or a line cook. And I can't tell you how many life lessons I learned being, on the front lines, working daily with people in a customer service sort of role, right? So everything from, dealing with the person who's super cranky about, the food that they want, and they've got all sorts of life happening behind them, and it's translating out to I'm going to be upset with this person in front of me, to me making a mistake on the line and having to own up to it and fix it, right? To getting to network with some of the big wigs at my college and university, which ultimately ended up serving me really well because they ended up getting me my first job post-graduation from college. So just had really good experiences, some really challenging ones too that helped me grow. But yeah, line cook and dishwasher at the grill at my college, my small college in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Nice. It's interesting. One of the things that jumped out when you were talking about that was just I was kind of visualizing, you in that environment and thinking about it, and there was probably an interesting dynamic. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would assume that there was an interesting dynamic because, here you are, and I know, your background, humble beginnings for sure, right? You scraped and clawed for everything you've gotten. But so you're in this position where you're going to this school, you've worked really hard to get there. And now you're in this position where like you're serving your fellow students food, right? And that creates a bit of a strange dynamic, doesn't it? I mean, it's gotta create a little bit of a haves and have-nots, kind of thing, right?
Absolutely. I remember seeing movies and reading about scenarios where you have two peers and then one of them becomes a boss or a supervisor, and what that power dynamic now looks like, because I have to be firm, but I also, we have this history together. I hadn't been exposed as much to the reverse of that, which is, hey, we're peers, but now I'm going to serve you.
Yeah.
I'm going to be on that side of the coin. And so, it had the potential for making some awkward conversations and some awkward interactions. But, I was really fortunate enough to kind of have friends who didn't give me too much grief about it. They would come in and give me a little bit because they wouldn't be my friends if they didn't come in and give me a little bit of flavor for it. But for the most part, I had really good interactions with people, and the times that were challenging, the times that were awkward, or where I started to develop this dynamic of, me feeling like less than and them feeling like more than, a lot of times I would harken back to like the thing that I'm doing is providing a good for the community, right? A good for the campus. So, you know, I can't control a lot of things, but I can control my perception of the thing that I'm doing, right? I can't control the kind of energy that I'm going to bring to the environment that I find myself in. And so while, there was the occasional person that I might consider to be overly privileged or overly needy or demanding, I oftentimes would temper that with, knowing that I'm providing a good service, I'm providing something that the community needs. And 95% of my interactions were nothing but positive. And so I tried not to let the too and few interactions that were a little bit more challenging, jade my view of the work that I was doing.
Yeah, well, and I have the privilege of working with you every day, right? And so one of the things that I think you're very good at, very skilled at, and don't get a big head about this, but I think
I'm already there.
But you're good at dealing in awkward situations, right? You almost thrive in sort of that sort of scenario, because I think you find a way of being more comfortable than most in a situation that most would deem fairly awkward, right? And I think talk a little bit about how that has played a part in your development and how you got to where you are now, and how you leverage that.
Yeah, I was never ever the smartest kid in the room. I was never I was a target, right? I was the kid who wore, knockoff shoes and hand-me-down clothes, and I wasn't the kid who was popular. I was not the greatest athlete. I was just kind of average Black kid in Chicago. And I found really quickly that you had kind of two options. You could, you can be in that circle of friends and where everybody's talking about each other, and you could let it eat you up, or you could kind of lean into it. And I decided that leaning in allowed me a little bit more latitude to be authentically me, right? So I took that deficit that I had of, maybe not having access to some of the same things that, friends and other folks had access to, and, kind of flipped it on its head and made it a staple of kind of my personality. So, I don't know, it was a coping mechanism that ended up turning into something that some people, couple people might find endearing. But that was just my approach to taking the lumps that life gave me and doing something else with it. So, and not to get too heavy either, because you know how I hate getting heavy, Scott. I mean, as a person of my identities, right? As a Black man in this country, there are a lot of opportunities for me to be in situations and in spaces where it's a little awkward, because I might be the only, or I might be the only one that holds a certain viewpoint or a lived experience. And so I don't have the luxury of being able to say, you know what, that's awkward. We're going to talk about something else. I have to live in that space. I got to find a way to operate within that space. And so, for all of the ingenuity that might go into, crafting a persona that looks like that, some of that's survival too. Some of that's, let's figure this thing out because you really don't have another option outside of figuring this thing out.
Yeah, I think that's a good point though, because we talk about that a lot here at Avenica, right? This notion of cultural wealth and this notion of people becoming powerful based on the experiences that they've had and the challenges that they've overcome. And kind of what I think you're saying is you took things that could have been deemed, disadvantages and challenges, and you put them to work for you, right? You made them part of your superpower. And I think that's really important, especially, to anybody watching or listening who's getting started in their career, right? Or thinking about making a change or anything like that. I think, understanding the things that you're afraid of, right? The things that you maybe shield from the public, the things that you keep behind closed doors. Sometimes that's the stuff that really is going to make you stand out, right? I mean, you want to be competitively different, right? That's part of the game. So one other thing you mentioned was authenticity, right? And at Avenica, that's one of our core values. We talk about that a lot. Talk to me about being authentic and how that manifests with things like code switching. We've talked about that before, right? Like you're going into this world where you can't help but walk into the room and you're going to be seen as different or other, right? Because that's how the world works. So how did you navigate that? What would you tell 22-year-old Teron on how to walk that line?
Yeah, I would tell him to not walk it, to be quite honest. Because I went for about 10 years after graduating from undergrad. I spent time working in higher education in undergraduate admissions. And I spent of those 10 years that I spent there, I spent maybe a good 8 or 9 of them being a version of myself, but not the most authentic version of myself. So I would find myself code switching. And for folks who aren't familiar with the term, code switching is essentially adopting a characteristic of the majority group, typically by the non-majority or non-dominant group, in order to coexist in that same realm. And so a lot of times I would change the way that I would speak. I would take a little bit of the bass or the flavor out of my voice. I might pronounce a term differently. Because of fear of how it might be perceived, of fear of how someone might interpret that, of fear of being labeled in a certain kind of way. And I found out probably later than I should have, definitely later than I wanted to, that being the most authentic version of myself was the version of myself that other people liked, but more importantly, it was the version that I liked. It was the version that made me me. And I remember doing some reading about identity, and I asked myself the question, who are you? Who are you? And I remember thinking that code switching has been such a part of my life for the last, 10 years of of working and 4 years of undergraduate education, that I was experiencing a little bit of an identity crisis. Because I didn't fully know who I was, because I had to be, this person at work, this person with colleagues outside of work, this person with friends, this person with family, this person with my Chicago family, right? Like I was just always a different kind of person. And I sometimes would look at, it's way too energy consuming of a task to try to even attempt to skirt the line. So if I could go back and talk to 22-year-old Teron, I would tell him to erase the line, be who you are, and what you have coming to you will come to you. Either it'll come to you or you will go get it. But either way, you will be better for it by going and getting it in the way that's most authentic to who you are.
Yeah, I like that. And it's that takes bravery though, right? I mean, it takes somebody doing some things differently, and certainly I think the world has changed a little bit since you and I were 22, right?
Absolutely.
But I do think you're right. I think we're also at a time now where people are listening better, maybe not fully, but there's more listening, or a little bit better listening, active listening, to be deploying that. And I guess part of that is being authentic. How does that translate into, explaining the impact you can make, right? So, you and I also talk a lot about storytelling, right? And we've both talked about how coming out of school, we applied for a lot of things, and there's challenges, and on paper we look one way, but you get us in front of somebody like, hey, we can make our case, right? So how did you leverage storytelling to get you where you were, and how do you continue to do that?
Absolutely. It took a long time for me to figure out that some of the things that I previously described as deficits were actually strengths of mine, right? So I knew that I was going up against folks who had internships where they balanced budgets and they managed projects and they oversaw teams of people, right? And they had that experience and that exposure. And I remember thinking to myself at one point, like, well, there's no way that I'm qualified for a position that this other person is looking to do, because they've clearly done more than I have. And then I thought about it for a second. I said, well, in my personal life, I've balanced budgets. I've made really difficult decisions. I've managed people. I've made it so that we've gotten food on the table and everyone's gotten their homework done, and made it so that the struggles of the outside world, when you're inside of the apartment, when you're inside of our affordable housing apartment, it wasn't going to impact you. That was my goal. That was me creating my brand and creating the culture of my company, which was my household, my apartment, right? I've done those things, but I never had that frame. I never had that frame shared with me. And so it took a lot of time to figure out, how do I take these real world life experiences that I've had that are really high stakes, right? And that's not to diminish any of the things that happen in internships. But a lot of times in the real world, or in your personal life, you're playing for keeps, and these decisions impact more than just your, potential livelihood. I had to figure out a way to take that story and translate it so that it showed whatever future employer, that I was a grinder, I was a hustler, I was a hard worker, I was the guy who's more than comfortable getting down and dirty, but I can put on a tie too, and I can go and speak with executives, right? So I could be whatever the position needed me to be because of my lived experience, because I had to be such a chameleon too, right? When I'm interacting in these worlds that might not look like the world that I'm most familiar with. So I was able to take all of that, take that story and translate it, and take it from being a deficit or something that I saw as an obstacle or a barrier, and turning it into something that was my propulsion, right? The thing that pushed me forward, the thing that was going to give me that competitive edge.
Yeah. So, I mean, did that happen naturally? I mean, how'd you learn that? Did you just wake up one day and you decided, hey, I'm gonna use what could be deemed a deficit, and I'm gonna use it to my advantage? I mean, how'd you get there?
I wish I was smart enough, strong enough, brave enough to say, yeah, it was all me. But no, I mean, I'm aware enough to know that very few of the things that we get in life we do on our own, or we get on our own. And so I'm a product of a lot of people looking out for me. So I remember specifically, I had a mentor when I was in college, and I was attending a predominantly white institution. I had a mentor who was a man of color. So he was an African-American man from New Orleans. And he made it his goal to make sure that he exposed me to a lifestyle that was other than what I had already seen. So that was part of that equation of being able to see this lifestyle that was a little bit different from what I had always seen or had been exposed to. But then he started to point out some of my strengths, and he did it in a way that helped me understand that, this challenge that you had was terrible, but look at how you overcame it. Right. And so he tried to help me see some of the strength in self. And after you do that, right, after you have allowed yourself, giving yourself permission to start to view the hurdles in your life as potential obstacles that turn into potential, fuel, it becomes a thought exercise, and then it just becomes a habit. Right. So now there's not a single hardship in my life that I've had that I can't in an instant flip and tell you about why it's made me a better person because of it. So sometimes it's somebody else going to pull it out of us. Other times it's intrinsic and it's already inside of us. But the big thing is to allow yourself to believe that you are more than the situation itself, and allow yourself to believe that you coming out of that speaks volumes to who you are.
For sure. No, I completely agree. I love that. I like to say to my kids every once in a while, allow the pain to be the path. Mm-hmm. Right. It's like, look through the pain and almost use that to pave the way to how tomorrow is better, and how you can reach for more and accomplish more. So lots of wisdom there, lots of great thoughts. As always, you never disappoint. So Teron, thank you so much. We'll have to continue this conversation at a different time when neither of us get in trouble for being too late. So,
absolutely. Hey, can I add one more thing,
yeah,
Scott?
Just don't ask if you can add it. Just add it, man.
Just go ahead and do it. Just do it.
Do it.
Here, I'll say this too. When we're talking about the ability to, because representation is important, right? And I'm clearly, I represent, at times I can represent, this existence that is, not always present in my community, folks who look like me. I get to, have a seat at the table. I get to, provide for my family in a way that I was never able to receive myself. And it's gotten me thinking a lot about power, right? How power manifests itself, how power shows up in different populations and what it means for people and what leadership looks like. And if I could leave people with any sort of thought, it would be two quick things. One is that good leadership isn't necessarily speaking up for people, but it's allowing a structure, or building the structure, or creating the vehicle that allows people to be heard for themselves. That's one, right? Good leadership is going to always allow for people to be their biggest advocate and create that self-determination and that self-efficacy, right? And then the second thing is that, once we have people who are in positions of power, I think we have to make sure that we don't mistake presence for power. Like being present and represented doesn't necessarily equate to power. It's what we actually do with that representation that's going to be really, really important, right? So how are we empowering people who now have a seat at the table to go and do more, to feel comfortable, to have the permission, the latitude, to make decisions, right? Because power is essentially the ability to make decisions and change the game, right? So how do we empower people to do just that? So I think if we can keep those two things at the front of mind, I think we end up creating not only healthy work environments and cultures where people feel like they have the most permission to learn and grow, but we create communities that end up being left better off than what we found them.
Love that. Couldn't agree more. Well said. That's and for what it's worth, you're definitely one of those leaders. So proud to work with you. So thanks again. Appreciate it, man. Have a good one, and we'll chat again soon.
Appreciate it, Scott. Take care. Good talking to you.
Thanks.
See you.